You're not doing the Bible study, Mom is.
I know to say stuff.
We're on. Good evening. Welcome.
Hello, everyone.
Hello? Hello?
Say hello, everyone.
Everyone is not even in here.
They're in here. They're watching online. You're online right now. You're an internet star. Okay, hand the microphone to Mom and go sit down. Thank you.
Thank you for that.
Welcome. Thanks for joining us. It's our pleasure to walk through this. I do think it's very, very important for us as we understand the Old Testament, gives us the proper context for the New Testament, because the value of everything that we're going through, and we're in this position. We've had a couple weeks off, or a week or so off, and we've been in the life of Joseph. So how did we get here, Chelsea?
To Joseph?
Yeah,
From the beginning.
from the beginning. And what was the main idea that we needed to take away from the creation stories as they were?
Goodness.
Wow, this is really good.
It's right here.
It's gonna be good, I know it.
No, when to say enough.
That's what God does, and we should
Trust the story.
Trust the story. So trust the story. Creation is enough. It's good. It was built to be good. It was made to be good. It was made to be fruitful and multiply. And then something gets in the way. It is desire. Desire gets in the way. And desire, we start to get in the way of what God wants to do, and really, not really manipulate, but just kind of about the time, if you're reading through the Bible, if you're reading through it critically, about the time where you're like, man, they're just never going to get it figured out. This is going to be bad. They are never going to get this figured out. Then what happens? Who comes along in Genesis, the end of Genesis 11?
Do you want the Hebrew or the English?
Go ahead.
Avram.
Abram comes along, and we're introduced to this man and this family that God chooses, right? And what defines Avram is not his worst mistakes, but his greatest victories. He learns from his mistakes, and he continues to press towards God. And what did we talk about Avram was something that really made him stand out?
Well, it's hospitality.
His hospitality.
Yeah.
The 60 plus pounds of flour that they needed into bread for these 3 guys.
Right.
Some ridiculous amount of loaves of bread for these guys. And just the hospitality, the willingness to show people how important they are. And along comes, and we're thinking, wow, they've really got this figured out. We think this is going to be kind of a short, and they all lived happily ever after, right?
No.
Abraham, into Yitzhak, Isaac, and then along comes who? Jacob. And about the time you think, oh, this is really going to be easy, Jacob just... He
did his own thing.
He kind of goes off the rails, and it's crazy to think. It's hard to imagine why God would choose to use Jacob on this lineage. But what is it about Jacob that we said was different? What was it about Jacob that we said God looks at it and he says, now that's something I can work with?
His chutzpah?
His desire, his fire inside of him, right? Willingness.
Which is interesting because you said desire. Because it wasn't his desire the other way that led to destruction, but his desire to be more.
His desire to be more. not his desire to settle, because that's what was the falling apart of the early stories. Those people decided, we can settle here, we can be everything right here. But the family of God continually lives in tents, and they make altars to God. And Jacob is a schemer and selfish. He's really tough to figure out. And then he has this son named Joseph, right? And what was so important about Joseph? What are some of the stories that we did last time that brought us to where we are? What was so unique about Joseph?
Well, he was son number 11.
Son number 11
out of 12.
Out of 12.
But he was the firstborn son
to who?
Rachel.
To Rachel.
And Rachel was...
What was Rachel?
Jacob's...
If you could describe her...
He was her... Rachel was not Joseph's, Jacob's chosen one.
Oh. She was... You mean he had favorites?
He had favorites, for sure.
You know, it's a bad deal to have a favorite wife.
You have one.
I do, but I only have one.
That's true.
If you have a favorite wife, meaning you have multiples, you have problems.
Right.
So Jacob had a favorite wife.
He did. And so he favored Joseph as if he were the oldest.
Yes.
I mean, he technically was, but not really.
So how were we introduced to this young man named Joseph?
Well, he had a very special coat.
A special coat. What made it so special?
Well, it was his extra coat.
It was his second coat. He had 2 coats. Everybody else had 1.
Yeah.
And it was very colorful. Yeah.
Yeah.
They do a pretty decent job. The Sights and Sounds Theater does Joseph in the Technicolor Dreamcoat, which is, I mean, it's a pretty good rendition, but we need to know the importance of being a second coat. And what did that lead to? All good things, right?
Oh, well, no. Not even close. It just led to jealousy.
Jealousy and infighting, and he ends up in prison.
In prison? Well, he ends up in a pit.
He ends up in a pit. And so last week was into the pit. And Joseph finds himself in the pit, and he's sold into slavery, ends up in Potiphar's house. But after he's sold into slavery, we get this weird story about Judah and Tamar.
Yeah.
Which we're going to revisit that this week.
Yeah.
And then he ends up at Potiphar's house and does really well. And then he ends up
in a pit, essentially, again.
Falsely accused.
Yeah.
Right or wrong. Falsely accused. Ends up in prison again. And the end of chapter 40, he interprets dreams for the
baker and the cupbearer.
The baker and the cupbearer.
Yeah.
And what does he tell the cupbearer?
Don't forget me.
Don't forget me. And that's where we pick up the story in chapter 41.
Oof.
Do you want to start reading? And I
just gotta get there first.
Okay.
I feel like my Bible.
It's page 31 of my Bible.
53 of mine.
Yeah, there you go.
Can you hear me? Like this is loud.
Do you want me to turn you up a little?
No. I mean, if everybody else can hear me, it's fine. So, Genesis 41 is Pharaoh's dreams.
Yeah.
So, yet the chief butler did not remember Joseph, but forgot him. That's the end of chapter 39.
Oh.
Or chapter 40.
Yep.
Okay. So
verse 1 says, How long has this been?
At the end of 2 full years.
2 years. Don't forget me.
2 full years later.
2 years later.
Then it came to pass at the end of 2 full years that Pharaoh had a dream, and behold, he stood by the river. Suddenly there came up out of the river 7 cows, fine-looking and fat, and they fed in the meadow. Then behold, 7 other cows came up after them out of the river, ugly and gaunt, and stood by the other cows on the bank of the river.
What did yours, the end of verse 2, what did it say?
Mine says meadow, but what does yours say, reeds?
I'm going to hand you this one.
Okay.
Yeah. So the most literal translation of the description of the cows is sleek and beautiful. Interesting.
It says
Go
sleek
ahead.
and fat, which, being cattle owners, I would agree
Yeah.
that fat is beautiful. So
Great looking mama right there.
they grazed among the reeds. So verse 3, after them, 7 other cows, ugly and gaunt, came up out of the Nile and stood beside those on the river bank. And the cows that were ugly and gaunt ate up the 7 sleek, fat cows. Then Pharaoh woke up.
Go ahead.
Verse
Keep going.
5, he fell asleep again and had a second dream. 7 heads of grain, healthy and good, were growing on a single stalk. After them, 7 other heads of grain sprouted, thin and scorched by the east wind. The thin heads of grain swallowed up the 7 healthy, full heads. Then Pharaoh woke up. It had been a dream.
Keep going.
In the morning, his mind was troubled, so he sent for all the magicians and wise men of Egypt. Pharaoh told them his dreams, but no one could interpret them for him. Then the chief cupbearer said to Pharaoh, "Today I am reminded of my shortcomings."
Oh, hold on.
That was one of those moments.
Before I get there, I do want to say, back in verse 2, yeah, I am. It's very important. I'm going to put this information in your head, and we're going to come back to it later. That word that is translated as reeds has to be helped to get there. The literal translation, because the actual literal translation of the word that's translated here as reeds doesn't make any sense. The literal translation of this would say, when out of the river there came up 7 cows, sleek and beautiful, and they grazed among the brothers. The word that is helped along to get to this word reeds is literally translated brothers. So, moving on. You're in verse 9. Go ahead.
In verse 8. Oh,
9.
Pharaoh told him his dreams that no one could interpret them. Did I read that?
Yeah, you said, then the chief cupbearer said
Oh,
to
then
Pharaoh.
the chief cupbearer said to Pharaoh, "Today I am reminded of my shortcomings. Pharaoh was once angry with his servants, and he imprisoned me and the chief baker in the house of the captain of the guard. Each of us had a dream the same night, and each dream had a meaning of its own.
Yeah.
Now a young Hebrew was there with us, a servant of the captain of the guard. We told him our dreams, and he interpreted them for us, giving each man the interpretation of his dream. And things turned out exactly as he interpreted them to us. I was restored to my position, and the other man was hanged." So Pharaoh sent for Joseph, and he was quickly brought from the dungeon. When he had shaved and changed his clothes, he came before Pharaoh.
That word translated dungeon is pit, is the word for pit. This is the only place in Scripture that the literal word is used that means pit. And it is a literal association between the pit that he was thrown into. It's the same word used when it says that he was thrown into a pit and that pit was dry and there was no water there. Okay. The word that's translated cistern or pit, same word right here that's translated as dungeon. Go ahead.
Pharaoh said to Joseph, "I had a dream, and no one can interpret it. But I've heard it said of you that when you hear a dream, you can interpret it." "I cannot do it," Joseph replied to Pharaoh. "But God will give Pharaoh the answer he desires." Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, "In my dream I was standing on the bank of the Nile, when out of the river there came up 7 cows, fat and sleek, and they grazed among the reeds. After them 7 other cows came up, scrawny and very ugly and lean. I had never seen such ugly cows in all the land of Egypt. The lean, ugly cows ate up the 7 fat cows that came up first. But even after they ate them, no one could tell that they had done so. They looked just as ugly as before. Then I woke up. In my dreams I also saw 7 heads of grain, full and good, growing on a single stalk. After them 7 other heads sprouted, withered and thin and scorched by the east wind. The thin heads of grain swallowed up the 7 good heads. I told this to the magicians, but none could explain it to me." Then Joseph said to Pharaoh, "The dreams of Pharaoh are one and the same. God has revealed to Pharaoh what he is about to do. The 7 good cows are 7 years, and the 7 good heads of grain are 7 years. It is one and the same dream. The 7 lean, ugly cows that came up afterward are 7 years, and so are the 7 worthless heads of grain scorched by the east wind. They are 7 years of famine. It is just as I said to Pharaoh. God has shown Pharaoh what he is about to do. 7 years of great abundance are coming throughout the land of Egypt, but 7 years of famine will follow them. Then all the abundance in Egypt will be forgotten, and the famine will ravage the land. The abundance in the land will not be remembered, because the famine that follows it will be so severe. The reason the dream was given to Pharaoh in 2 forms is that the matter has been firmly decided by God, and God will do it soon.
All right, that's a great pausing point. So I've got a couple questions here to ask. How different is this Joseph in chapter 41 from the Joseph in chapter 40?
Well, he's older.
He's older, 2 years older.
A little bit wiser.
He is a little bit wiser. What was his approach to the dreams and the cupbearer and the baker? What was his response to them?
He mentioned right away that they were sent by God or dreamed from God.
Well, what did he say? He says, "Tell me your dreams."
Do not interpretations belong to God? Tell me your dreams.
Yeah. So he obviously has to have some conversation. But then his approach to the cupbearer and the baker is, hey, the interpretation of dreams are God's. Tell me your dream. And I've got this. But in the presence of Pharaoh, what does he tell Pharaoh?
He can't do it.
I can't do it. But God can. This is a very different approach. This is a very different statement. Like
do you feel like his ability to interpret those dreams in the dungeon with the 2 people didn't get him anywhere?
Right.
So you think it's like hindsight's 20/20? Like, I've been here before. I can't do it on my own merit.
So think about this. I'll tell you, he was a broken man. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Do you want to restate that? You want to restate that so everybody? So he is broken. He has been through this cycle. What's the cycle of Joseph's life? What's the rhythm of Joseph's life? He is given gifts. He is lavished upon.
He's favored, and then he's
favored.
thrown in a pit.
He has a dream. There are dreams or aspirations that are vocalized either for him, like either by him, through him, or for him. And the next thing that happens is that the robe clothes are stripped off of him and he's thrown into a pit and forgotten about. That's all he can think of. You know why I say he's forgotten about? Because what was he to his dad? You mentioned it.
The favorite one.
His favorite. So,
well, in his dad's eyes, he was the Behor over.
That's right.
The 10 brothers who actually came before him.
So when he has these dreams, I would say maybe he should have had a little bit more discretion in the realm that he gives it. But I would say that based on the favor that he had from his father, he expected that role of leadership to be in the same house. Like, this is a declaration that God is communicating to me that He has ordained me to be the ruler of you guys, to be the one above you guys. Like, here's what you need to know. In the Middle Eastern culture, in the Jewish culture, just as much as the Islamic culture, if you're going to hear from God, the most direct way for you to hear from God is through a dream. And that cannot be challenged as whether it's from God or not. So when God gives him a dream, and that dream is that his sheaf is going to stand up, his work, his position is going to be a position of authority over his brothers. Maybe he should have had a little bit more discretion, but to him it was, and to his brothers, it would have been a confirmation of, I'm Dad's favorite, and everything that he says that I'm going to have, I'm going to have. So then when he's thrown into the pit, what should his expectation be?
That his dad would save him.
Dad's coming to get me. He's going to come looking for me at some point. But what does he not know about the story? He doesn't know the details that we know.
He doesn't know that the brothers went back and lied. And
Yeah,
he was
exactly. So his first trip into the pit leads him into Potiphar's house, and he's working diligently to learn what he can learn in Potiphar's house, expecting the whole time, at some point, Dad's going to show up and come get me. Yes. In Jacob. Correct. And we're going to get to that here in just a minute. But think about that. So Joseph has spent this whole time, on some level, hoping the Dad's coming back. Some point I'm going to be rescued from this. And then he goes from the pit to Potiphar's house to a place of prominence. So he gets gifts, he gets responsibility, he gets extra favor from Potiphar. And then somebody has dreams and aspirations, but it's not God and it's not Joseph, it's Potiphar's wife. And what gets removed from Joseph? His clothes. And where does he go from there?
To the pit.
Into the pit. And this pit is dark and lonely. And yeah, the captain of the guard gave him extra work and extra responsibility. That is not the same, ladies and gentlemen. You're the head of a prison. The head prisoner of a prison.
Yeah.
And you interpret the dream of somebody who's going to be back in the place of the king, like in the palace with Pharaoh. You interpret his dream that he's going to be restored. Hey, when you get restored, don't forget about me. 2 years later, Joseph knows, hey, he's forgotten about me. So now this broken man is standing in front of Pharaoh because finally he's been remembered reluctantly from the cupbearer, but Dad's still not coming. And so there's a lot different Joseph standing in front of Pharaoh than was standing in front of the cupbearer and the baker. The next question I have for you is, how in the world does Joseph interpret this dream? He says, dreams are for God. Interpretation of dreams are for God. I can't do it. But he has no hesitation in interpreting the dream.
Oh, yeah.
How does he know how to interpret the dream? What is it about this? There's a rabbi, his name's David Foreman. Great resource. Aleph Beta, something like that. Anyway, great rabbinical traditions teacher, especially on the book of Genesis. He says there's one key understanding in this story that if you understand it, the dream interprets itself. And it's the number 7. If you know that the number 7 in this dream represents 7 years, all the rest of it takes care of itself. But how in the world does Joseph know that 7 represents 7 years?
Because that's what he comes from.
Is that have we heard a story that has to do with 7 years followed by 7 years? This is Jacob's story. 7 years, and his commitment is to work 7 years for a sleek and beautiful wife. Almost word for word, the description given to who?
Rachel.
Rachel.
What did they say Leo meant?
Tired eyes. Instead, he got tired eyes.
Yeah.
And he had to work 7 years more.
Right.
Holding on to tired eyes.
Oh, man.
I mean, so the question is, who's this dream for?
I mean, Pharaoh had it.
Who's the target of this dream? Is God's target of this dream Pharaoh or Joseph?
I definitely am leaning more toward Joseph.
Both, for sure.
Yeah.
But
I mean, it obviously it had something to do with Pharaoh.
yes, he's broken. Yes. Every broken person who follows God, God is going to show up, and because it's about God now. It's about His provision, it's about His ability. This is something that Joseph has to wrestle with. Because God is getting Joseph's attention. And yes, he interprets this dream and tells Pharaoh, hey, this is what's going to happen. And then he begins to have this wherewithal, this chutzpah, this something different about him, this almost a reckless abandon at times, to not just interpret the dream for Pharaoh, but to give Pharaoh instructions on how to go about dealing with it. But if you really think about it, this, out of the Nile comes 7 cows, sleek and beautiful, and they begin to graze among the brothers. And out of the same Nile comes 7 gangly, gaunty, really skinny, ugly cows. And they devour the 7 fat cows, and you can't even tell that they were there. This is the story of Joseph, isn't it? Because he was from which cow? He was from which mother?
The pretty one.
The pretty one. The beautiful one. The one who was chased after. The favorite one. And he was intended by Dad to be the inheritor of all that he had. But along came the sons of Leah. And what did they do?
Well, essentially they devoured him.
This whole time, you think about the story of Jacob, while he is working, he works 7 years for Rachel, ends up getting Leah, and in the 7 years that he has to work again to actually get Rachel, what does Leah do?
Has kids.
Has a bunch of kids. Has a bunch of kids in the meantime. And there's so much you can go into, and we're going to spend a little bit of time in our discussion time, but does that change your thought process on this story? You ever thought about the vision and this dream given to Pharaoh not being aimed at Pharaoh, but actually being aimed at Joseph? And think about how many years he had to wrestle with this. And we're going to keep talking about this here in just a second. So we're going to pick up that story, verse 33. Is that right?
Yes, and now let Pharaoh look for a discerning and wise man and put him in charge of the land of Egypt. Let Pharaoh appoint commissioners over the land to take 1/5 of the harvest of Egypt during the 7 years of abundance. They should collect all the food of these good years that are coming and store up the grain under the authority of Pharaoh to be kept in the cities for food.
Hold on, real quick. Who do you think Joseph has in mind there in verse 33?
Probably himself.
Yeah, you would think himself. I mean, you've got all these wise guys, all these magicians here. You told them your dream, and they were worthless to interpret
Well,
it.
and he says discerning and wise man.
Yeah.
He's obviously had
You
some
should
discernment.
appoint a discerning and wise man. And like, who might that be? Well, don't worry. We got jobs for the rest of these guys who couldn't quite cut it.
Right.
Let's appoint governors, right? Or commissioners.
Yeah.
County commissioners.
Right.
To take a fifth of the harvest of Egypt during the 7 years of abundance. Collect all the food from the good years. Keep it as food in the city. Go ahead.
This food should be held in reserve for the country, to be used during the 7 years of famine that will come upon Egypt, so that the country may not be ruined by the famine. The plan seemed good to Pharaoh and to all his officials. So Pharaoh asked them, "Can we find anyone like this man, one in whom is the Spirit of God?"
Yeah.
Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, "Since God has made all this known to you, there is no one so discerning and wise as you. You shall be in charge of my palace, and all my people are to submit to your orders. Only with respect to the throne will I be greater than you."
So here's the deal. This is the beginning of the redemption cycle. Why do I say that? Because the rhythm of Joseph's life is gifts, followed by dreams and aspirations, followed by his clothes being removed, and finding his way into the pit. But once the cupbearer remembers him, what is the first thing that it says happens?
That he puts on different clothes.
He's pulled out of the pit.
Out of the pit. He shaves.
He's shaved, puts on clean clothes.
Then he interprets a dream.
Then he comes before Pharaoh and hears his dream.
And then he's favored.
And then he gets the gifts and favor. It's a redemption. It's a reverse of this rhythm of the destruction, this breaking down of Joseph. And now we're going to build him back up. But because of the character that's in him now. And here's the thing. Over the next 7 years, what is going on? What's going on in Joseph? Joseph has some real struggles here. Wouldn't you say? If you were in Joseph's position, would this be kind of a tough spot to be in?
I didn't hear the first part of what you said because I was talking to him, so I don't know what you're saying.
Joseph's going to be struggling right here, especially over the next 7 years, I think.
Right here in this appointment?
Yeah, as he's coming, once he's appointed into this position, Joseph's really struggling, I think. Why would Joseph be struggling? He's got a lot of stuff to be in charge of. This is true. I think it's a deeper struggle than that.
Well, I think if you read more into it.
Well, how far, let's talk. Think about who he is. Here's where I think he's having a struggle. I'm going to say Joseph is having some daddy issues. How old is he now? He's 30. How old was he when he found his way into the pit the first time?
17.
17.
Oh man, that'd be like Nicholas to Caden.
So for the
That's
last 13 years,
yeah,
he's been waiting for Dad to show up, and he's never showed up.
Yeah.
There's a movie, a Star Wars movie, Rogue One. This guy named Galen Erso, I think is what it's called. What his name is, and his daughter. They're the main characters of the story. Galen is the designer of the Death Star. And they find his daughter in a prison And they're breaking her out to try to figure out. And they ask her this question. When's the last time you talked to your father? She says, about 15 years ago. And they ask her, do you know where he is? And she says, well, I like to think he's dead. It makes it hurt less.
Yeah.
Don't you feel like that's kind of where Joseph is at this point? When's the last time you saw your father? 13 years ago. Where is he now? I like to think he's dead. Because that would mean that he didn't forget about me.
Dad, you said that the first time.
Like, think about that perspective. Okay? Joseph has been fatherless for 13 years. And now he has a new father figure. One who is providing for him, protecting him, making sure he's taken care of, training him up in the way that he wants him to be in decision making. So Joseph has this struggle, this identity crisis. So now, all of a sudden, Joseph is at least 37 years old. Probably closer to like 40, 41. Huh? And his brothers show up. Okay. Somewhere between, I'm assuming somewhere close to 40. Like he's definitely at least 37, right? Because there's 7 years of plenty. So now he's 39 years old. He's been fatherless for 22 years. Thinking he's forgotten and given up on. And his brothers stroll into town. This is a tough spot to be. Right about the time where he feels like redemption has been happening. He's finally getting back in this rhythm of being in charge and being blessed again. And he's handling it well. And he's got a wife and he's had 2 kids now, Ephraim and Manasseh. His brothers show up. They don't recognize him. But he recognizes who they are. The question that we run into is, what kind of man is Joseph? Yeah. They recognize him from afar off. And now they're standing right in his presence and they don't know who he is. They're looking him face to face and can't realize that he doesn't belong with all the rest of them. He's not the same as everybody else, but they can't tell. Yeah, I mean, they haven't seen him for 22 years. What's the difference between a 17-year-old and 39? There's a lot of difference.
Especially in a man.
About 40 pounds, you said?
About 40 pounds. Yeah.
Maybe more. I mean, think about this. This is some deal. A few different wrinkles, yeah. So what does he do? He confronts them, asks them questions, claims that they're spies. And they say, no, we're honest men.
We are all the sons of one man.
All the sons of one man. How many of them are there, do they say?
Well, yeah, he says, you've come to see where our land is unprotected. But they replied, your servants were 12 brothers, the sons of one man, who lives in the land of Canaan. The youngest is now with our father, and one is no more.
Man.
Ouch.
We got a dead brother. We got a youngest brother that's still at home, which means who's here with them?
Nobody.
Benjamin's at home.
Oh, it means Judah's there.
All of them.
Well, he
all
said
the
there were
10
10
brothers.
of them.
You remember this story
Remember
about
how
Judah?
it like took a right turn and Judah left and
This
was
random
upset.
story about Judah that he's not with his brothers.
Mm-hmm.
He's not there. He's gone off somewhere else. Well, there's been reconciliation because Judah's back. It's either reconciliation or desperation. And think about this too. If Joseph's 39, all these other 10 brothers who came to see him are all older. Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah, probably in the 50s. Maybe closing in on 60. These first 4 were all born in 7 years. Before the marriage to Rachel.
So at least 7.
At least 7 years. Benjamin at this point, yeah. So probably close to 30, 25, 30. I mean, there's a big gap here. So what does Joseph do? He knows they don't recognize him. Claims they're spies. He says, you're going to do something for me. He puts them all in jail for 3 days. All 10 of them. Comes back to him, says, this is what's going to happen. You're going to prove that you're honest men this way. You are going to leave. One of you are going to stay here. The rest of you are going to go home, tell your father, and bring back that youngest brother here and prove that you're not lying. So to prove his point, he has guards come in and chain Simeon and drag him off. Sends the other 9 on their way with food. Just enough to get them by a little while. And now here they go standing in front of Dad. And who do you think speaks up first? Reuben. Reuben says, who should Reuben be?
The Behor.
The Behor. His firstborn. Speaks up and tells Dad, hey, our brother Simeon, the second oldest, he's in jail. What do you mean he's in jail? I mean, this guy questioned us, claimed us to be spies. We told him we were honest men. He gave us food and sent us back, and he's holding Simeon. He says, if you want more food, you're going to have to bring that youngest son to prove that you're not a liar. And he says, not a chance. He says, if you'll send him with me to make sure that you don't lose anything, Reuben says, if something happens to your son Benjamin, I'll give you my 2 sons to replace the 2 sons that you would have lost. What does Jacob say? Nope.
No way.
Not going to happen.
My son will not go down there with you. His brother is dead and he's the only one left. Which is kind of harsh to say.
The oldest brother
Yeah.
just got told, his brother's dead. And I blame you.
Yeah. He's the only
And
one
your
left.
brothers. And he's the only one left. Dad, you got 12 sons. No, I got 1.
Wow.
One's gone. And I've only got 1 left. Well, the rest of the 10 of us really feel good about this, Dad. Who's recognized? What's the name of the man recognized who makes that response?
Makes what response? The response to that happening?
Who is, according to the scripture, who is Reuben talking to?
It's Jacob.
Jacob. But this young man, younger than Reuben man, who's about to step up and have a conversation.
Well, some time had passed. They'd
So,
eaten
yeah.
all the grain they'd bought. Father said to them, go back.
You got to go back. We're going to die if you don't go back and get
And they're
something.
like, we're going to die if we do go back.
So who's going to say anything? Reuben's like, well, I took my shot at this. I was going to step up and
That
do
didn't work.
something. Nope.
But Judah,
Benjamin's not going to do anything. So why is this so important? Why that story about Judah? Because Judah said, do you Nakar this, Dad?
I don't remember what Nakar was.
Do you recognize this?
Yeah.
And turns around and he ends up with a division between him and the family. And he's broken by his cord and his seal and his staff being placed in front of him and said, do you Nakar this?
Yeah.
Do you recognize what's going on here? And so this broken man says, no, she's more righteous than me. She owned what was going on, and I failed. And I'm not going to do that again. So here he stands before Dad, and he doesn't make the plea. He has the same conversation with Jacob that Reuben had, with completely different responsibility. Judah says...
Well, he says, I think the important part, he says, we can't go because you won't see us. You won't see my face again. And his face, Joseph's face, is the one they had to see to get food, unless you bring your brother. So Israel asked, why did you bring this trouble on me by telling the man you had another brother?
So Judah,
why'd you even let him know?
So Judah says, hey, we're not going to get any food unless you send Benjamin with us. If we show up in front of that man without Joseph or without Benjamin with us, we're all dead. And you're not getting any food. He says, and Israel.
He goes back to Israel, which I think is interesting.
Israel says, why'd you bring this trouble on me? Why did you even tell him you had a brother in the first place?
They replied,
the character of Jacob changes
mm-hmm.
in this conversation.
Yeah.
And he will almost not a single time more be referenced as Jacob the rest of his life through, I think it's 48 or 49, chapter 48 or 49. He will not be referenced as Jacob anymore because he's not Jacob anymore. His character has changed. This conversation will transition him from a selfish, broken man into a man who believes in promise and the future and who is caring for others.
Mm-hmm.
This is the transition. And Judah's response is, are we supposed to lie to him? He examined us closely. If you're going to send him, here's what I'll do. I understand you. I understand what's going on. I understand what loss looks like. I've lost 2 sons of my own.
He still kind of has them deceive.
Yes, he's still struggling with that deceiver stuff. Yeah.
When he's like, if I send my youngest son.
Yeah, he's afraid that all the remembrance of Rachel is gone if something happens to Benjamin. So Judah doesn't make the offer that Reuben made. Judah steps it up.
He says, send the boy along with me, and we will go at once, so that we and you and our children may live and not die. I myself will guarantee his safety. You can hold me personally responsible for him. If I do not bring him back to you and set him here before you, I will bear the blame before you all my life. As it is, if we had not delayed, we could have gone and returned twice. Then their father Israel said to them, if it must be, then do this. Put some of the best products of the land in your bags and take them down to the man as a gift. A little balm and a little honey, some spices and myrrh, some pistachio nuts and almonds. Take double the amount of silver with you, for you must return the silver that was put back into the mouths of your sacks. Perhaps it was a mistake. Okay. Take your brother also and go back to the man at once.
So here's where we get. And there's so much more to the story. And the challenge is, it doesn't. It just says their sacks were full of silver. And on their way back, they realized that the money was back in their pouches.
I think Joseph just did that.
Yeah, he did it on purpose. He knew he was taking care of his family.
Right.
Like,
but
he
to
knew
them,
that.
they thought they were cursed because of it.
And so he doubled it. Jacob's like, we are not going to leave any room for error here. If they forgot to take your money the first time, we're going to give them twice as much this time. Because you are not coming back without that boy. And here's what's crazy. Judah, who was responsible and the decision maker who recommended throwing Joseph in the pit in the first place, stands before his father and says, if I don't show back up with this one, hold me personally responsible the rest of your life. Kill me, do whatever you want with me. But I'm staking my life on it. Not only for your well-being, but for me and my brothers and all of our kids, let us go. And for the first time, someone has influenced and got the ear of Jacob enough to recognize this is about more than just you, Dad. This is about all of us. It's about the survival of all of us. And I'm willing to put my life on it. And the call of God from the very beginning was what? From creation was what?
Trust the story.
To trust the story. To trust. God has called us to trust. The greatest declaration of trust is forgiveness. The greatest declaration of trust is forgiveness. Benjamin shows up. He releases Simeon, sends him off, puts the stuff in the satchel of Benjamin, and creates quite a ruckus. And they have to come back and stand before him. And Judah stands up and says, no, you don't understand. I lost one brother. And I put my life on the line for this one. So if you're going to take him, don't. Let him go. Keep me. Do whatever you want with me. But don't you dare hold on to this boy. And that broke Joseph. That was the breaking point for him. He couldn't keep the facade any longer and told them, no. I think on some level he probably didn't believe his brother or dad were even still alive. Because it was easier. But now when he's confronted with it, he's got to deal with it. But finally he realizes he has the ability to forgive. And that God has been at work all along, and God has been anointing him and doing work through him and leading him. But it took all of the into the pit experiences to break him down enough that when he was pulled out of the pit, he wasn't the same man as that went into it. And he was moldable and able to be used by God to forgive and to lead the nation forward. So much so that the two kids that he has, Ephraim and Manasseh, Jacob takes on as his own kids. He says, hey, these two kids who you had while I was gone, while I didn't know you were alive, they're mine. They're going to be part of my inheritance. They're going to inherit my name, be known by my name. Any kids you have after them, after this point, they'll be known as yours. And he blesses them, and he even blesses them and puts the right hand on the younger kid, the left hand on the older kid. And Joseph is like, no, that's not right, you blind old man. This is the way that it goes. And he's like, nope, doing this on purpose. But God's call, the redemption process that's going on here, is that God's call for His people is still about being hospitable and trusting the story. And no greater example do we have that we trust the story than we're willing to forgive. We're willing to give up our right at retributive justice. Because Joseph had every right to hold especially Judah accountable for what had happened to him. But he had to trust that God was doing what God wanted to do by extending forgiveness and walking this story out with his brothers. And so with that, we're going to spend some time in our discussion groups. I want to encourage you to come and join us on Sunday mornings at 10:30. And I'm telling you, no greater way will you find freedom in being able to walk in the presence of God than forgiving. Being a person who forgives. We love you guys. Have a great week.